Hello everybody and welcome to the video. If you're new here, my name is Brenna and I have spent the last 4 years living in my self-converted Toyota Hiace camper van. I am house sitting for a friend at the moment who's gone to visit her family over the holiday season, and a few weeks ago I put a video up on YouTube about how much it cost me to live in my van for 2024. Now, I do publish a video every year on what my expenses were, and on the last video a lot of people became disheartened that they wouldn't be able to afford van life. I received a lot of comments about different expenses in different places. So what I've done is I've come up with a video that says how you can calculate if you can afford van life for where you are. So you don't have to take it just on my expenses. All right, I'm going to go through this with you very methodically to help you step by step to work out what it would cost you to live in a van. Before I get right into the video, I want to welcome all the new subscribers that came from my last video on how much YouTube has paid me for 860,000 views. First of all, we've now reached 1 million views. Apparently you're all very nosy about how much YouTube paid me, and I've received a lot of new subscribers. So welcome everybody, it's great to have you here. When I talk about van life, I made a video a year or two ago about 6 different ways to do van life. I'll put a link to that here, but let me run through those with you because not everybody wants to live in a van full-time. So there is full-time, part-time, seasonal, you may just want to do it for a season like a winter or summer. A one-off, you might just want to do a one-off trip to somewhere, or in Australia we do a lap around Australia. You might just want to drive up the east coast of Australia or the west coast of Australia. You might not actually want to travel at all. You may want to just set yourself up like in a caravan park. You may stay in one for 3 months and another one for 3 months. So minimal traveling, but more staying still. Or the 6th option is you might want to use your van to house sit yourself around a place. So you can stay in your van in between house sits, but you can do a lot of house sitting. I have met a lady, Bronwyn, hello Bronwyn, who does that. She mostly does house sitting all around Australia. Before you can work out how much it's going to cost you to live in a van, you need to know how much it costs you to live now. So do you know that? If you don't, I published a video on how to do your budget and work out what it costs you to live. So I'll put a link for that here. I'm going to put lots of links in this video for everybody to see what I've already talked about. So you do need to know how much it already costs you to live before you can work out how much it's going to cost you to live in a van. When you're doing your calculations, I have a long list of things to consider. Now this might not be everything, it's everything I could think of, and some other people might have some ideas in the comments. So the first thing on the list is going to be food. So with food, I find I spend more living in a van, and I'll explain to you why. First of all, I don't have a lot of storage to buy things in bulk, which I usually always do in a house. I don't have a freezer, so I can't store things in a freezer. I have to buy smaller amounts of things that are going to be used up, you know, as they're fresh. I also spend a lot of time in small country towns where the food is more expensive. Now that's my choice, my preference. You need to research on where you want to travel or where you want to go in your van as to how much the food is going to cost you. But you really need to know how much it costs you now, and then you can work out where you might not be able to save. Okay, next I'm going to get into a lot of expenses that relate just to actually having a van. So they won't relate to what you are in a house now. So first of all, you're going to have insurance on the van. Now I had a lot of comments in my expenses video about how my insurance seemed high and everything like that. Insurance varies a lot between people, between state, between countries. I know when I lived in Canada, insurance was almost 4 times as much. So you need to work out what your insurance is going to cost you and what things you want. I add on extras like a rental car if I can't have my van. I have accommodation if I can't have the van. So I do what suits me. You need to do your own research on how much it's going to cost you to insure your van for your situation, for you personally. The next expense is going to be your van registration. Now again, I had a lot of comments about that in the expenses video. Again, that varies widely. In Australia, from state to state, it varies. I am actually based in Western Australia, and where my van is registered in Western Australia, and here our third-party insurance is included in our van registration. So I have my van registration part and my third-party insurance part. It's all lumped in together. I don't separate it out on my expenses. So you need to again research how much it's going to cost you, or depending on where you live in the world, what it costs you just to get the van on the road. Another expense I have relating to the van is I have roadside assistance. So if you live in a city, it might be something that you don't keep on your regular vehicle, but because I'm traveling all around Australia, I have roadside assistance, which I have used, and I have the top cover. So they'll tow me, I think like 300 kilometers, they'll put me up in accommodation, things like that. So roadside assistance, look again where you are, where you live, what level do you want, and that need to add that in. Okay, another big expense for the van is van maintenance. You're going to have to factor in maintenance for the van. So some of these maintenance issues will vary depending on how far you travel, like tires. So for tires, you get, I think, around 50,000 kilometers. So you need to work out how long is it going to take you to do 50,000 kilometers, and then factor in when you're going to need to replace the tires. You need to do regular van maintenance. I do my regular maintenance. It's usually every 6 months. I don't usually exceed 10,000 kilometers in 6 months. And then anything else that you need, you might need new wiper blades, anything to keep the van running, you need to factor that. And the older the van is, the more likely, the more expensive it is going to be to keep it running, which I found out in 2024 with my van. I spent a lot of money on it just to fix it up so I could keep going. All right, another big expense is going to be your fuel cost. So that may be petrol, diesel, gas. If you're in North America, you call it gas, as we call petrol here, but you need to work that out. Now, I have a hand for you. I did a video on how I calculate my costs for my big trips, and again, I'll put a link to that here. You need to work out how much you're going to drive and what the cost of petrol is. I always put kind of like a maximum cost, and then also for me, because I don't want to spend more than $100 a week on petrol, it limits how far I can kind of drive in a week. So I use that for planning. Sometimes I won't drive at all, and then it can go more. But you need to kind of figure out in a year how much are you going to drive, and then factor in your cost. The other thing you need to look at is the fuel economy. If you don't own a van yet, what's the fuel economy on your van? Because I got the biggest shock in the world. I used to drive a little Nissan Tita, tiny little car, little hatchback, and that thing, as they say, ran on the smell of an oily rag. Now, I'm not sure if that's an Australian saying or not, but that thing ran forever on $30. And then I got my van, and it was the opposite. It was just a bit of a gas guzzler, especially once you fit it out, it gets quite heavy. So yeah, the van uses a lot more. And I hadn't really factored that in when I did my initial calculations before I moved into the van. That was my biggest shock. I had budgeted $50 a week for petrol, and that was never ever going to sit. I've always done $100 a week. Even as the petrol price has gone up, I've just kind of like, I just can't travel as much. That's how I've done it to fit my lifestyle. But you need to work it out, and there's a video here to help you. Okay, another big expense when you're living in a van and if you're traveling around is going to be your paid camping. Where are you going to stay in the van? So this varies a lot for me depending on where I am, depending on the season. Sometimes there's free camping available, which I love. Sometimes there isn't, or I don't feel safe where the free camping's available, or the weather is not really suitable in that area where the free camping is. So you need to figure out how you're going to do it. This is going to take some research on your part. You need to actually do some research about what your options are. I use an app called Wikicamps, and I did kind of have an idea of where I was going to be able to stay. I think in the first year I did a lot more free camping, but that was COVID. There was a lot more free camping available. Now there's a lot less and less. Some of the areas that were free camping are now paid. So I have to take that into consideration every year when I do my budget. I also thought when I first moved into a van, I watched lots of videos, which I'm sure you have. If you're thinking about moving into a van, you've watched a lot of videos about people living in vans. And a lot of them were living in the city and doing this stealth camping thing. Well, I worked out within the first week, once I left the city and got out into the bush, I thought, oh no, I'm not staying in the city. I love the bush so much. I love being out in nature. And the only time I'll stay in the city, I'm usually parked in a friend's driveway. That's it. In other words, no, I'm not stealth camping in the city. But something to take into consideration if that's something you think you're going to do. Another thing to factor in, which is something I don't really do, is if you're planning more like a holiday or a one-off trip, or just in general, something you think you want to do, paid attractions. So like when you pay to go do something or you pay to see something. So I don't do a lot of that, mostly because I have a dog with me in the van and I can't leave her in the van. So it's not something I've really done. And I did a lot of that before I moved into the van. So if you are going to do things like that, you really need to factor that in. Some of them are very expensive, very expensive. You might want to go do whale watching, or there's some like tree walks and things you can do. So look at that if you're planning and see how much things are actually going to cost you and factor that into your budget. A very important thing to consider is the telephone. Now, I'm in Australia and I can only share my experience. So before I moved into the van, when I lived in the city, I was using Optus, which was fine when I was in a city. But when I moved into the van, as soon as I left the city, I no longer had phone service or internet service. I use my phone as a hotspot. So for me, traveling around Australia, the best thing I can have is Telstra. I have found it works really, really well, pretty well everywhere I go. But you also need to look at that where you are, or if you are in Australia, where you're planning to travel and where you'll be able to get phone reception with the provider that you have. Tagging onto that is internet. So when you live in a house, quite often you'll have a separate internet and you'll have a modem and things like that. I work online, so I work online, part-time as a bookkeeper, and I use a lot of the time I'll use my phone as a hotspot to work. So I needed to, again, to have Telstra was really good to do that. The other thing I have is Starlink now, and they have a new mini Starlink as well, but I use Starlink as well for internet. So one thing to think about if you are working or if you think you're going to need internet, you might want to, if you stream shows or something like that, just research what you can use in your area for where you are and how much it's going to cost. All right, we're getting to the end. Hang in there. If you enjoy this video, could you give it a thumbs up? That'd be great. All right, the next category is laundry. Something you don't often think about in a house because most people have washing machines in their house, but you're going to need to do laundry on the road. So this is going to cost you money. There's a few options you can do, like a laundromat, caravan parks. I mostly just do it at a caravan park. Some of them are free, some of them are coin operated, but it's not a huge expense. But don't forget to factor in laundry. How are you going to do laundry? How much is it going to cost you when you're on the road? All right, the next one does not apply to everybody, but it applies to me. So I'm going to mention it in case it's something you haven't thought about, and that is getting a storage unit. So I sold up my house and got rid of just about everything, but I still have a small storage unit. You may just be renting your house out or something, but you still might need a storage unit to keep some things in. So don't forget to add that into your budget because it's something you're going to have to continue to pay every month when you're living in the van. All right, this next one is the second last one. is something that varies immensely between countries, and that is your health. So I live in Australia. We have a Medicare system here, which is taxpayer funded, and I don't have any health costs. I can go to the doctor and what they call bulk bill, and I'm never out of pocket. I do keep private health insurance though for other things like glasses and dental stuff like that, hearing aids, things like that. So depending on where you live, you need to factor in your health costs. I know in America it's very expensive, so you need to take that into consideration when you decide to move into a van, is add that into your budget. You're going to have to pay for your health. You might need to have prescriptions filled, like eyeglasses, dental work, all those things done. Don't forget to add that into your budget. Your life doesn't stop when you move into a van. You still have to do all those things. Now, the last one is not a category that affects me, but I have seen other people do expenses video and they include it, and that is alcohol. I'm a non-drinker, non-smoker, so I don't have that expense, but if you do drink, don't forget to factor in your alcohol into your budget. Sometimes, a lot of people will pull up at a campsite in the afternoon, they'll be having a glass of wine or something. So don't forget that one. So that is everything that I could think of that you need to work out when you're going to live in a van. I hope this has helped you. Again, you need to work out what it costs you to live now. There may be some specific expenses that you have. I haven't included things like subscriptions. You have subscriptions to Spotify or, I don't know, maybe Netflix or something. Just think about everything you spend now. You need to know that. What expenses are going to continue when you live in a van, what expenses will end, and what new expenses do you have. I really hope this helps you work out whether you can afford it for where you live, wherever you are in the world. Don't just take my expenses if this is how much it costs. I'm still working. I've got a pretty decent income. And so, I could definitely cut back, but I'm enjoying my life. So you need to work out what works for you, okay? It's really important. Work out what works for you. And if you can't afford to do it, look at other options, look at other things you can do in your life. Look at what you can do, don't focus on what you can't, okay? There's always something you can do to get out in nature and be happy. All right, thank you everybody for watching. See you on the next one.